we showed you last video yesterday, we had this nice video on the right here of Tiger Woods. And as he's doing his thing here, I want to talk about the wrist first. So the wrist is the second most common injury. And you can see that down here in the bottom of the swing, there really isn't a whole lot going on with the wrist. The wrist is pretty neutral on both arms. And you can also see that the wrist really has a lot of bones. The motion in the wrist mainly is side to side. The wrist is really designed to flex, so to wrist flex and extend. And then there's a little bit of side to side motion. And you can see that that's kind of the problem, is when we get up into this position where the wrist, it's not really flexing or bending and extending, but when you get right at the top here, you can see that the side to side motion that happens in the wrist, so the wrist has to move sideways. It's called radial deviation. And it would be like if this wrist bone moves side to side, there's really not a lot of motion there, not at least compared to the flexion and extension. So anytime you take a joint beyond its limit of motion, it can become inflamed and painful. And wrist injuries can be career ending for golfers. Now, let's zoom out here if I can. Let's see if I can zoom out. And here we go. Now, the most common injury for a golfer is back pain, right? We've talked a lot about back pain. But again, if you look at this image right here of Tiger Woods, he's got a lot of rotation happening in his entire spine. The problem with that is that the lower back is only designed to rotate 5 degrees per bony segment. And if you look at right in between here, there's this thing called a facet joint. That's actually the joint of the spine. And if you rotate that too much, you're going to run into some problems, some spine problems, spine pain. And then we've got these little nerves that come out of the spine. And you can see that they're coming out of this hole right here, right? And again, this hole is going to be, the diameter of this hole is going to be dictated by how well this vertebrae moves. So we don't have a lot of rotation in the spine. That's why we're going to talk a lot about, especially in the video tomorrow, how do we rotate so much and not damage our spine? And that's going to be mainly because we've got a lot of rotation in the hips, as well as the upper spine. And then the final and third most common injury is the shoulder right here. You can see that during his backswing, let's go back to that position. During his backswing, this left shoulder in particular goes through what's called horizontal adduction. And basically that's just the arm reaching across the body. Well, again, if I zoom out and I take my nerves away, and if I zoom into the shoulder, you see how, let's give me some muscles too, maybe. So rotator cuff. All right, now it's a great picture. You see, this is the rotator cuff muscle, one of them. There's actually 4. See how that sits right underneath this bone? And then here's the shoulder itself, the humerus. Well, if I take my arm and move it across my body, this rotator cuff can get pinched in between this bone and this bone right here. And so that's actually called shoulder impingement. So again, if I have limited motion in my upper spine and my hips, it's going to take my shoulder joint and move it way farther than it wants to move. And it actually can cause compression in that area. So shoulder impingement, which leads to rotator cuff tendonitis. Not a fun thing.